thank you so much for joining me on Pilot Talk Podcast today. I am thrilled to be reaching all the way around the world to my friend Matthew Webb, who is in Singapore now. And Matthew and I worked together some time ago, and he is just a great pilot and a very interesting entrepreneur. Matthew, thank you so much for agreeing to join me on different days. I'm in one day and you're in the next.
Thank you very much, René. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, great. Today, I really want to talk with you about the aircraft that I think you've flown for quite a while, the Gulfstream G280. A great airplane. And I remember selling your G100 so that you could move into that. And so I want to talk a little bit about the contrast between those two planes. But let's first start out with the G280. How many years did you fly that?
It was coming up on 4 years. This is like 3 years, 8 months.
And what was your experience with it? Like, if you could just sum it up in a sentence or two, what was it like flying that plane?
Well, I mean, fortunately, I hadn't flown anything bigger before, so I was sort of overwhelmed by it. It's just what it was. But through the years that we operated, it became very, very infatuated with it. It was a great airplane. It did everything that the box said it was going to do. The passengers were incredibly happy with it. The experience from actually being involved from the beginning, from when we actually started the purchase process to the actual build, and then to the outfitting and then taking delivery, it was all an amazing experience. It was great to see how that all went together and how good Gulfstream's products are. I mean, we were very impressed with how that all followed through.
And was it pretty seamless going from the beginning of that process with the selection all the way through to taking delivery of the airplane and then support after delivery?
It was very seamless. Gulfstream's very accommodating. They're very helpful. We from the initial outset, when actually taking the options and then to the outfitting of the cabin, for example, they do a lot to actually make sure that the cabin is done in a tasteful way. So they don't just let the principals and the ears that are involved with principals to actually go crazy on a cabin. They've got people that actually are very specialized, and they've got showing and viewing rooms of all their samples. And you can actually go and set out, and they'll build 3D mock-ups and give you samples of what you've actually chosen, so you can actually be 100% sure of what you're getting against that. And I must say, the cabins come out beautiful.
Well, let's talk a little bit. You already mentioned that your passengers really liked it. Your principal really enjoyed the airplane. So let's talk a little bit about what the passengers said about the airplane when they were flying in it. The roominess, the accommodations there, the galley, everything in their experience.
Well, the most noticeable thing about the Gulfstream is that, or the G280 show, it's an exceptionally quiet airplane inside. It's very, very quiet from takeoff to cruise. The pilots have to be very careful what they say in the cockpit, because it does travel all the way back to the cabin. The fresh air concept that Gulfstream's got going on leaves the passengers very refreshed. And the space and the size inside the cabin is really good. A lot of people say, it doesn't have a flat floor, but the concept of actually raising the aisle, having the aisle and the raised side, actually gives you more width to the cabin. And that's very noticeable, so that the actual chairs and the seating is actually nice and wide. So they really, really enjoyed that.
Fantastic. So just kind of on the same theme, what about the luggage capacity?
The luggage capacity is huge. The other day I was actually looking in the back of the G450, and there's a noticeable difference between how big the G280 is compared to a 450. It's got a huge baggage compartment and a nice big door in the back, so you can load it from the back. It is accessible from the cabin, which the passengers obviously really like. And at the same time, it can load 2,000 pounds of baggage in the back. So it's got a phenomenal amount of space in there for luggage. We never struggled with bags or sizes of bags. You sometimes have to tone the passengers down because they start to believe that they can bring anything.
Well, that's very good to hear, I'm sure, for a lot of people. So getting back a little bit to your experience in the airplane, tell me a little bit about flying it. Tell me about the operations, the avionics. What's that experience like for you?
As a pilot, and we operated the aircraft as well. So, we were fully involved from actually all the flight planning through to closing the aircraft down. From flying the airplane, it's not a challenging aircraft per se. She actually handles really nicely, although a little bit heavy in the roll. But it is a bit quirky in crosswind landing and takeoff. This is due to the narrow landing gear track of the aircraft, and it sits very low to the ground. So when you rotate, those wingtips become awfully close to the asphalt. So in crosswind landings, the technique does change a little bit, and it has to be addressed. So you have to be very aware of it. That was probably about the only quirky thing about the aircraft when it came to actual flying aspect. Besides that, the aircraft was full of performance, and she really operated really, really well.
So talk to me about the climb. What did that look like for you? What was your cruise speed? All that good, fast kind of stuff.
Well, the aircraft the amazing thing was that the book that was published is what the aircraft actually does. It's not a case it has to be the perfect conditions to actually reach optimum flight altitude. So we did numerous long trips. We had the aircraft up at max gross weight, taking off from Cyprus with pretty high ISO conditions. And the aircraft managed to climb right up to its optimum flight level. Usually it would cruise at about 45,000 feet. 43 at max weight with ISO about 10 is generally really soft. But she always managed it. There was never any performance limitations in that regard. When it came to actually cruising, we always did the flight cruise at what Gulfstream recommended in the aircraft, which is the 0.80 mark. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that was there was a great balance between speed and fuel consumption. So you always met the book figures actually doing 0.80 all the time. As soon as you start pushing it out 0.82, 0.83, 0.84, topping it out at 0.85, you start to see that the fuel figures start to increase quite a bit, and you sort of lose that range performance. And we were, at flight department, more sort of concerned about trying to optimize our fuel.
Well, that makes sense, especially because you were operating mostly in Europe and the fuel's a little pricier there than it is here in Texas.
That's correct.
Well, so fuel burn per hour in the aircraft was about what?
Well, as a general rule, you could actually work with about 2,000 pumps the first hour. And then she would drop nicely back to about 1,700, and then for the second hour, and then she would just stop at about 1,600 pounds for the rest of the trip. Sometimes, if we were very lucky and the conditions were right, she'd do about 750 pounds a side, which is 1,500 pounds of fuel. So she was very, very comparable to our G100 at that stage. I mean, the engines are exceptionally efficient.
Fantastic. Well, talk to me about the range.
Again,
what's the longest trip you took?
I must admit, Gulfstream again, really, they presented a range figure that was nearly all the time attainable. It took really extenuating factors to actually bring that range down. The longest trip we did was from Cyprus, Paphos, to the Azores. It was a 7-hour, 45-minute flight at the end of the day. We ended up in the Azores. We ended up going missed approach due to wind shear and landed after that. And after all of that, we still landed with just a little bit over 2,000 pounds of fuel, which for this aircraft is an exceptional lot of fuel to land for minimum.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What about the maintenance? I know that you managed the aircraft in addition to flying it. Tell me about the scheduled maintenance and how that went, what to expect from maintaining this aircraft.
The maintenance in the aircraft is actually very straightforward. It is designed around to actually support maintenance facilities. The aircraft has got an onboard management system that can actually pick up where it's at fault sits in the aircraft. So there's a lot of line replaceable units, and if a fault is detected, it usually just takes a line replaceable unit to be replaced, and this usually rectifies the fault. Obviously, with all new builds and taking delivery, you do come across faults going along and you get rectified as you move through. But Gulfstream tech support is generally very well looked after. We looked after very well. As it comes to the schedule of the annual maintenance, the one failing in having a G280 in Europe at that stage for us was there was a very limited amount of places to actually do maintenance. At that stage, there was only 2 available to us, and deciding on where to go and to actually get that done, that was more the difficult side of things, due to how far do we go for maintenance versus cost and things like that. But the aircraft was super reliable. It actually gave us no real big issue, and the maintenance was generally right on the money. There was nothing very surprising coming out, and I didn't know if I attributed that to the aircraft or to actually she was illegal.
Fantastic. Well, tell me anything else you can think that is valuable for people to know when they're upgrading to a G280 from a 100 or a 150 or a different kind of jet, and this is their first Gulfstream.
Well, I think, first of all, this is going to be your first Gulfstream. It's a great Gulfstream to get in. The cabin is, I might get wrong on my facts, but the cabin is generally, I think, an inch narrower than a G650, and it's, I think, an inch in height less than a 650. Obviously, it hasn't got the same length as the 650, but the cabin is actually really, really nice in that sense. And to step into something like this, where it's actually got a really good range, it's got good economics, it's got a good cabin, it's got great avionics, it's a great first step into the Gulfstream family. And at the same time, for certain people, they might find that it's all they really need. They don't really need to go any further. And so G280 sort of ticked all the right boxes. It's got just the right range to actually reach the right destination. And if you ever decide to do a really long trip, she can do it with the fewer stops, and you choosing where you really want to actually go. So it's a great airplane in that sense, that it actually does manage to sort of extend out in a super mid-sized category where you really want to go.
Wonderful. Well, Matthew, thank you so much for being on Pilot Talk Podcast. Really appreciate your insights into the G280. Y'all are going to want to also tune in when I interview Matthew about his entrepreneurial ventures in taking on European taxes. It's a great story and an amazing solution.
Thank you.